Do you think potentially that psychedelics could end all your suffering? Do you think you could end up awakened, enlightened? There are so many that have walked this path before that talk about the doorways of perception being blown open. So today's episode on the Psychedelic Mom podcast is about psychedelics and awakening. And by awakening, there's so many other ways to say it: freedom, self-realization, liberation, non-duality. Do you think that psychedelics and earth medicines have the capacity to end all suffering, to wake you up so that you could live in a place of total bliss and nirvana? It sounds far-fetched, right? Yet, in the midst of this psychedelic renaissance, when psychedelics are being touted as the magic pill for everything, now I'm throwing out that potentially psychedelics could be a tool for awakening, for reaching the highest stages of enlightenment. What do you think? Well, today on the Psychedelic Mom podcast, I have a conversation with Frank Yang, and we talk about the ways in which psychedelics can be tools for awakening. Frank is what some would call an arhat, which is the highest level of enlightenment for Theravada Buddhism. And what does that mean? It means he lives a non-dual life. He sees reality as reality is. All of the filters, all of the doors of perception have been opened. No time, no space, no self, empty fullness, some would call it. There's so many ways to try to describe what this experience of non-duality is like, but all of them fail. But Frank does an incredible job of sharing his journey. Why am I so interested in this? Well, if you're someone who has experienced psychedelics or earth medicines, you may have experienced some of these states of consciousness that have radically adjusted your perception of reality as well as yourself. So many people come to psychedelics for so many reasons. Some, it's been part of their heritage, their tradition, and they've been taking them for initiatory rites and rites of passage. In the Western model, we seem to be talking about earth medicines and psychedelics as healing tools for trauma, for PTSD, addiction, eating disorders, Lyme disease. The list keeps getting bigger and bigger. Some people end up taking psychedelics like a magic mushroom with friends on a hike and find them a deep connection to Mother Earth and their deeper friendships. There are veterans in the United States looking to heal traumatic brain injury. One of the things that I believe at the very core of all of us is that deep longing to know what truth is, to know what this reality is, to know who we are. Who am I is one of those profound questions that at some point every human being asks. Can psychedelics help in that process of discovery? What is the unbinding process? There's a lot of talk often about the ego. Should we get rid of it? Should we keep it? What is it? When I came to psychedelics, I was quite naive. I had idealized my childhood, idealized all of life, myself, and psychedelics really showed me my shadow. I didn't even know what shadow was before psychedelics. And anyone will tell you, if you're looking to end suffering, the shadow is part of the process. Nobody frees themselves or becomes awakened without the deep process of suffering to end suffering, kind of paradoxical. So if you've had a psychedelic experience and are kind of wondering like what's going on, I was just curious about consciousness. Someone told me about ayahuasca and I wanted to have an experience. Or wow, I had no idea 5-MeO DMT was going to be this powerful and I had this major expansion. But then you find yourself in a contraction. What is that? Well, some would say that it's the natural process of awakening, that part of what's happening here in this realm is a returning to what is always here. And psychedelics can certainly be a tool. Frank Yang became a YouTube phenomenon. He has been videotaping himself since about 14, like a video diary. But what made him popular were his videos on his extreme workouts, his lateral jumps, his insane 8,000 calorie drinks, his performance art. He is an incredible pianist and violinist, but he liked to do wild things like walk down a city street in his underwear playing the violin. He had all sorts of stunts. And during this time, Frank Yang was diagnosed with bipolar. He had many episodes of mania as well as a sex addiction. And so, suffering. He was suffering, which led him down a path of meditation, finally to psychedelics, and finally to being free of all of suffering. So, again, I had just heard about non-duality, I think it was last March, with Dr. Angelo DeLullo. And check out my interview with him. It's interview number 33. And I also interviewed Nargis Alegria. She's interview 48 for deeper understandings of non-duality and liberation. Now, when I first started listening to Angelo, I didn't understand anything. I had no idea what Angelo was talking about. No self, unbinding, emptiness, empty fullness. None of it made sense to me. Using my senses as a portal, basically, there's no one seeing, no one hearing. None of it made sense. But as I started to listen, not only did I start to understand, but I had visceral experiences of what he was talking about. So Frank and I get into some of the things that you experience on this pathless path to nowhere, to enlightenment that doesn't exist, that's always here. So if you are on a path with psychedelics, at some point, I imagine you have felt some discomfort and well after the journey. So understanding what potentially that discomfort could be and how maybe you could hold that discomfort or that suffering in a way that supports your path of liberation. Well, Frank and I get into a lot of these conversations. He is this lighthearted, fun to talk to. I definitely recommend at some point you go to Frank Yang's YouTube and watch his awakening process and just even see from 3 years ago, since he had his full on liberation to now, he's just changed in every way, physically, the way he talks, all of it. One of the other things that I noticed in interviews when I do talk to people in the non-dual world, a lot of them have done earth medicines and psychedelics. We're going to talk about what psychedelics were the most helpful, what psychedelic feels the most like living a non-dual reality, and how psychedelics can actually continue to support you on the path of deeper self-realization. But there's also an interesting piece too. What do psychedelics feel like after enlightenment? Are they the same? Find out on this episode. I am so excited to have you here today. I have watched and listened to everything that you have out there for this interview.
Oh my God. Even the bodybuilding stuff?
No, actually, I saw you put those in some of your clips.
Yeah.
So I saw a little bit of it. So you're Taiwanese and you have become a YouTube phenomenon star through basically taking videos of your exercise process, your workouts. In that process, you went through an awakening. You recorded that as well. So I have found your entire, like watching you from your early days of recording, even at 14, going down the stairs to like current day. It's quite a transformation. So I would love to hear about this transformation.
I've been recording my life since I was 14, like you said. And
Mhm,
whatever that I was doing, I always had this mindset of transformation and transcendence, whether that's like
mhm.
fitness or even just going down the stairs or like throwing a ball against like my wall and then hitting myself with it. And it's like, progressively the ball gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there was just this innate mindset of like going beyond. Yeah, and then when I
Mhm.
started to get into philosophy after bodybuilding obviously, it's about just lifting heavier weights and looking more aesthetic, looking more shredded, getting more muscle. There's a transformation there. by default. And then even after that, I got into philosophy. I just wanted to like know as much as I could about, especially about the human mind, like consciousness
Mhm.
or what is reality. Like the two questions that everybody probably asks in their life, even subconsciously: what the fuck is this, and who am I? Which is the same
Mhm.
question. And then even just reading
Mhm.
philosophy, I was just like wanted to read the deepest philosophy, and then wanted to be the most like intellectual person possible, wanted to be the most creative artist possible. I started playing the violin at age of 5, and then been making visual art my whole life, and the video thing is just part of the visual art. And I studied film in college, and even making like film in college. I was like, I just want to make the trippiest film so I can mind fuck people like in the most intense way
Mhm.
possible. So there's just something inside me that just wants to express that kind of intensity and transformation. And then when I get into like meditation, same thing. I just want to go as deep as I can with the jhanas. I want to be as boundless as possible, as timeless as possible. Even though ultimately the non-dual state, we can talk about that later. That's not even a thing. Like you can't
Mm.
really increase or decrease awareness. It's only through the mind's interpretation of awareness that make it seem like awareness is like brighter or less bright, more or less luminous, or consciousness is expanding. But ultimately, this has just always been like fully awake. And even
Mhm.
psychedelics, like I never, the most intense psychedelic experience I had was on 5-MeO DMT, and that was 2019. That was still
Mhm.
before I had any kind of opening into non-duality, but then
Mhm.
that was a very good glimpse.
Yeah. So, were you suffering? Was there
Oh
suffering
yeah.
that led you to the meditation, the philosophy? What was going on for you to be so deeply seeking?
Uh, Suffering, intense
Yeah.
suffering. Like I was diagnosed with
Mhm.
bipolar disorder, and I was also a sex addict, and that was one of the reasons why I started to get into meditation. I wanted to reduce my sex drive because that was just too much for my mind to handle. And
Mhm.
another reason I got into meditation or even psychedelics is just wanted to figure out how the mind works. But um, every time I broke up with my exes before, like I would go into this like suicidal mode. Yeah.
Mm.
Or if I'm not in the suicidal mode, I would be like very, very manic, just like all over the place. So intense
Wow.
suffering. Yeah. That's
So,
what drove
what
me to a
made
lot
you
of
go
this.
to meditation?
Yeah, the philosophy thing is kind of the same. It was just like maybe if I can just read about a bunch of different ideas, maybe like I could transcend my suffering, or at the same time understanding how the mind works. But then eventually I
Mhm.
realized that in order to make some of the stuff that you read about in philosophy books into your direct experience, you have to have the direct experience. It's not just something of the intellect. And also,
Mhm.
like, you read about Buddhist philosophy, how everything is impermanent, how there's like no self and stuff like that, how everything is empty. You can't really experience that through just reading about it.
Mm-mm.
And it's not going to make a difference in your life just reading about impermanence. You have to actually observe the nature of experience or the nature of reality or of the mind directly and see the impermanence and make into your realization. The three steps of realization is: first, you have an intellectual understanding. That was like,
Mhm.
reading about it. That was my philosophy phase. And then you have a direct experience. And then either direct experience you can have from meditation, go to retreats, have glimpses, or you can have from psychedelics or even just intense suffering. Sometimes people get an opening. You have an
Mhm.
experience, but the experience doesn't last. You have to lock
Right.
in your experience into a realization. And a realization ultimately is just the way things are without any kind of contractions or resistance to the present moment. Yeah. And that comes a long way. The
So,
difference between letting everything be as it is and feeling like you're a contracted entity, separate entity that's like stuck in your head is the difference between the sky, like viscerally feeling like you're the entire sky, or like this clenched ball that is like trapped in like in somewhere in the head or in the body. That's what the separation comes from. Yeah.
so, in some ways, the non-dual path is going from that constricted person believing they're a separate self, living among separate objects, suffering, resisting everything that's happening in their lives,
Hmm.
to the realization that you are nothingness and everything formless. Um,
Hmm. You're also
but
the
it's the
somethingness too,
experience of it. You're the relative and the
and the absolute.
non-relative
Yeah.
and the absolute. Um, So that process, let's start with, well, actually, you had said maybe a couple of years ago that you reached Arhat, which is considered to be the highest level of enlightenment. So, how does someone who's at the highest level of enlightenment experience like day to day reality?
Uh, I'm pretty used to it now, but like the way I describe it to people who don't have any reference point to this is kind of like you're tripping on acid like 24/7. But without
Hmm.
like the trippy visuals. Or I think a better
Okay.
analogy is the 5-MeO DMT experience I had. When I
5 a.m.
broke through on the
Yeah.
5-MeO DMT experience, like I went through phases during that trip where I was still like experiencing infinity in my mind. Like there was still a lot
Hmm.
of fractals and visuals and just like, mystical experiences. But then I was like, something inside me knew that wasn't it. There was still like
Hmm.
hallucination. There was still hallucination in there. So like I remember the last trip I had, 2019, I took a second dose and then I broke through even the fractals. And then
Hmm.
I just experience reality as it is, or the mind as it is, which is just boundless, timeless, vast, spacious, and everything is like a hologram without any like distance or gaps between experiences. There's no subject object split. One way you can describe it is like, in the Hinduism, they say you realize true self, and true
Hmm.
self is, you can say, everything becomes the subject. Like this whole field is the subject. When in Buddhism we
Hmm.
talk about no self, which means that if the self is the subject disappeared into the object, so everything becomes an object. Even your deepest thoughts and desires, your body sensations, is no different. It's in equal footing than all the objects in the world. So that's just two ways to describe the same thing: true self and no self. You cease to believe in the dream of separation. You also cease to believe that there's any kind of inherent existence to reality. You can say everything is just the holographic projection of the brain or the mind, but then it's kind of like waking up to a single character inside a video game to the entire game, or just waking up from the single identification to a single thought of you to
Hmm.
just the mind at large. But this mind at large, I used to think, there was a phase where I took this insight, experiential insight, and then frame it around some kind of a nature of reality. Like, okay, the reality or the universe is made of consciousness, but even that has to be let go of, because there's still a little, there's still going to be craving and clinging to that, or to like clinging the rest of yourself to this God consciousness or whatever. But then when you let
Hmm.
go even of that, then that's true freedom. When you just realize you don't actually know anything, and that the only thing you can have a direct experience of, even though it's infinite, is this is your experience, pretty much.
Right here.
Yeah, yeah. But then, of course, this, what I call your experience, is part of reality.
Hmm.
But then you
Hmm.
can't really know reality in of itself. Even Kant went into that as well. Kant said you can only experience this sort of the appearance of things. You can't know things as themselves. So people have been talking about this for like thousands of
Hmm.
years. Even Plato said you
Yeah.
can only experience like the shadows on the wall. You can't really experience like what is truly out there, right? So I don't know what I'm experiencing right now ultimately, except for what Buddhists call the suchness, or the emptiness of phenomenons, which is totally full and luminous. Yeah.
So, how did psychedelics support the path? How would you say, for someone who is using psychedelics, how it can be both a kind of tool for this journey, but also kind of a side street?
I think psychedelics is really good for dissolving solidity. So ultimately, this path is about dissolving all the conditionings, and some people call it shadows, or the
Hmm.
unconscious, just any kind of contraction or resistance you have inside the body mind. And I always say this process is extremely physical. Is as
Hmm.
long as you, as soon as you dissolve all the solidity in your body mind, you experience the vast spaciousness, and you can do that through meditation, through vipassana, where you kind of use your direction of attention to the power of your attention to like dissolve all the solidity in the body mind that creates a sense of separation. You can do that through like mindfulness vipassana. You can do that through do nothing
Hmm.
meditation. If you just stare at a wall and do nothing for 20 years, all your conditioning shadows will come up, even without realizing what they are. But
Hmm.
different people have different ways to go about it. Or you can do it through psychedelics. Psychedelics is one of the most direct and efficient ways actually to dissolve conditionings. But some people that get into psychedelics, if they don't realize that, it's very easy to get sidetracked or get stuck in the content of the dissolution. So every time you're having a
Hmm.
psychedelic experience, you're actually just tripping on your own conditionings. And then I didn't
Hmm.
realize this until like most of my conditioning has been dissolved. That, when looking back on it, I was like, holy shit. Like all the psychedelic experiences, even like the trippy visuals, the waltz breathing, they're actually just a byproduct of this dissolution.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to experience, but if that is the only thing you're looking forward to in a psychedelic trip, it's very easy to just create more conditionings on top of conditionings without just letting it go and experience
Mhm.
something that's even much more profound than any kind of meditation experiences you have or any kind of psychedelic experiences you have. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back to how physical this process is, because I think that's one of the things I've been so surprised at is number one, how deep and hard this process is and how physical it is, like
Hmm.
like painful. And I heard people
Hmm.
say like I felt like I was dying. And I heard a little bit about your dark night, the one that got really hard. So let's talk a little bit about this unbinding process and
Yeah, it's there were moments in my path where I was just in my bed for like 2 weeks when I couldn't even get out of bed. That's how intense it was. There's so much identification to like our programs and our quote unquote egos that if those programs start to dissolve, you're gonna feel like you're physically dying, but that's an illusion. Looking
Mhm.
back on all those fears I went through on the path, they're just kind of irrational because an illusion can't die. What you really are is what they call deathless, can't die either,
Mhm.
right? It was never
Mhm.
really born in a sense. But then it's the identification to the illusion that creates the sense that you're dying. But then that's also just an illusion. But then
Like, there's
it
that saying, "You have to lose everything," you know? Did you feel that
yeah.
way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
not just a one-time thing, it's like cycles and cycles of it. There are moments where I
yeah.
feel like if I let go, I'm gonna die. If I don't let go, I'm gonna die
Mhm,
too. So there's like
mhm,
absolutely no
mhm.
place that you can be except for
Land.
you can't
Mhm,
even surrender. It's like you
mhm.
surrender to even surrender, you let go of even letting go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, does suffering, when you reach the highest level of enlightenment and all of the, unbinding has happened, does suffering cease?
Suffering stops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean the Buddha said nirvana is samsara, right? So
Mhm,
like he said the world is suffering, but then there's no suffering to me is pain times resistance.
mhm,
There can still be pain or pleasure because pain and pleasure are two sides of the same coin. There can still be the sensation of pain and pleasure, but there's no mental sufferings around that. There's no mental contractions around that. Yeah. So there's just no
so
resistance to even resistance itself. Yeah.
So the suffering is definitely the resistance.
Yeah. That's
And
all
I
there is.
noticed that, yeah. And I noticed just even in psychedelic work with other people and stuff, it's a lot about the shadow. And I've noticed that people work with the shadow differently. Some people would say you have to feel it all.
Right. That's one
Um,
way to go about it. You just feeling it all is just a way for you to not resist the resistance. Ultimately, it's just about letting things be the way it is. But you can also, like I said, yeah, use
mhm,
meditation techniques like vipassana, where it takes a little bit of effort
mhm,
to like contract your attention to the solidities and then seeing, penetrating it and seeing through the empty nature of things. Because the word vipassana means to penetrate and see clearly. So you want to penetrate your sensation, dissolve in them, and then see clearly the nature of each sensation as just being an empty fabrication of the mind. And the ultimate insight is both
mhm,
nirvana and samsara are just your own creation. And or you can do it through self-inquiry. That's another very popular method. We just ask yourself, who am I? What am I? And you just look.
mhm,
You look, even for the one that's doing the looking. But then ultimately you realize that you can't really find the one that's looking. You can't find the self. So that's self-inquiry. So I think that with practice, I look at practice as like a triangle. There's three pillars of it. On the
mhm,
one side of the triangle, you have your vipassana, your mindfulness, concentration. You deconstructing sensations to empty space. The other end of a triangle is your do nothing meditation, just surrendering, letting go, feeling things, and just accepting everything, unconditional love. And then on the other end of the third end of the triangle, you have self-inquiry. And I look at psychedelics as kind of like the fourth leg.
mhm,
And then all these practices are
mhm,
kind of feed on each other. And then if you take just one of these practices to the end point, it's going to be the same as taking any other practice to the end point. Ultimately, there's no
mhm.
practice. Yeah. So there's like infinite ways you can skin infinity, but then ultimately
Yeah.
it's just going to be the same practice. Yeah.
And does everybody go through the same thing? Like, one of the things I'm noticing now is it's almost these two extremes of feeling 5-MeO DMT, you
Hmm.
know, and extreme suffering. It's
Yeah,
almost like this feeling
it's
of
like the cycle.
non-duality and then
And then
extreme
suffering.
suffering.
That's very, very normal. That's the cycle that I'm talking about. The cycle between a mystical
Mm,
experience and opening and integration, or just the rest of your shadow coming up due to the result of this opening. And then these shadows or these debris of the conditioning that comes up will be sucked into the ultimate, into the infinite space if you just allow it.
mm,
But then you go through like cycles and
mhm,
cycles of this. First you have a little opening, and then some stuff come up, and then you integrate that.
mhm,
You let the space dissolve the condition, and then the next time that you have an opening, the space becomes more boundless, and on and on and on. And then
mhm,
each time you have an opening, if the open is becoming more and more boundless, you're going deeper into your subconscious. You're going deeper into the shadows and bringing the subconscious to the light by dissolving it into the
mhm,
space. Yeah, but then sometimes when you go even deeper into the conditioning that hasn't been uncovered yet, sometimes it's just like 2% of suffering, even though let's say you're like towards the end of your path, you're like 98% boundless, 98% suffering free. But that 1 to
mhm.
2% when it rises can feel like 98%.
Like
Because
death.
yeah, like death, because of how, because then like your entire ego structure is hanging on to that 1%, right? But when that
Mhm.
1% is getting dissolved or getting deconstructed, it could feel even more intense than previously. So I always say that the brighter the light, the dirtier the windshield. Yeah.
Yeah,
So in some sense it gets
that
easier.
makes sense.
In other sense it gets, sometimes it's more difficult. Like even like before I got on the path, the kind of suffering I had was more like a personal kind of suffering. But after I started to open up into this
Mhm,
true nature, even though when it's still not very stabilized, um, the suffering, or the, I should call it, the dark night of the soul, that comes from
mm,
as a result of this deconditioning, unbinding process, is more like existential. It's almost like instead
yeah.
of just you as a person suffering, now it's the universe suffering, or now it's God suffering,
Mhm,
in a sense. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. So, I'm just gonna use myself as an example here, in case anybody else out there is like, I can notice the things that I resist, this feeling of losing certain things. So I'm curious for you, when you went through this process and you felt like, I think you lost a girlfriend, your grandfather, like, what is that? What is this feeling like that we're losing things or our whole life is dissolving? Is it truth? Is it our story? What is
It's
it?
just your story. Yeah, it's just your story that's
Yeah.
dissolving. Ultimately, ultimately, this, even dissolution is an illusion. Yeah,
Mhm.
but then
Right,
like
because it's
doing it, yeah,
already here.
it's already here. There's nothing to dissolve. Yeah, yeah. But then
Yeah, like
you're really only dissolving the contractions around things, or the
mhm,
sense of
mhm,
separation around things. Yeah, I think that the Buddha talks about two darts of experience, and I think this is quite important to understand. Um, if you're an organism just bumping around to the world in the world, you are going to
mhm,
experience the first dart hitting your senses all the time. Even just like perceiving this screen right here, it's through the
mhm,
senses, right? Through the visual sense, and then hearing the voice, through the audio sense, and then you have the six senses, five senses that we know of, and then the sixth sense is the mind. So even if you become fully liberated, there's constantly things hitting your senses. But then
mhm.
the person who hasn't gone through this process, the contraction of the suffering comes from the second dart. The second dart is sort of the extra resistance that your mind is creating around just the nature's way of expressing itself. So you
Yeah,
dissolve in the
and you can
second dart.
feel it.
You can feel it,
Yep.
yeah. So you dissolve in the second dart, but the thing is, like, the ego is just the second dart too, right? So ego is
Mhm,
nothing but a contraction, right? So the ego is the second dart, right? So when people talk about killing the ego or dissolving the ego, you're not talking about killing life. You're talking about just dissolving the illusion of the second dart. Or even if you do the do nothing
mhm,
meditation, if you just sit there and do nothing and just accept everything to be the way it is, the second dart is gonna just merge with the first dart. Yeah. So
mhm,
that's why you're
mhm.
letting go of, right? You're just letting
Yeah,
go of the resistance around
yeah,
things. That's it. Which
and
is
the
life and
ego
death for
really is
people. Yeah, who is
yeah.
identified with that resistance. Like I talk about
Right.
like dissolving the center, dissolving the observer, like dissolving the seer, hearer, thinker,
Hmm.
doer, experiencer, feeler, whatever that is. That is just a result of a second dart.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as you mentioned earlier, you can read about that or hear about that, but unless you experience suddenly your consciousness or awareness not being behind your eyes anymore and being the entire
Feel,
field,
yeah, yeah.
it's hard to understand that.
Without experience, like it's impossible to understand it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
then, like I said,
And then
psychedelics
I
is a very good reference point. Like sometimes people will be taking
That's
psychedelics and I'll be
true.
like, "Oh, okay, you talk about this awareness being panoramic and centerless and boundless," and I never knew what you were talking about. And in your videos, you use like this 360 like effect, and I
Yes.
was like, I didn't know what the hell I was trying to express. And then I had a psychedelic experience, and then, oh, I was like, okay, I think I know what you're talking about now. Maybe it's not the full thing, but like I know what you're talking about now. And just listening to like the words that I'm saying, just little pointers, can actually have an effect
Mhm.
too. Some people just listen to words and they have a very small glimpse. Or if you take those words and you kind of contemplate a little bit and just let it sink into your even your conceptual mind. The next time you meditate or take psychedelics, you are going to see that there's more chance of you seeing that, experiencing that, than if you didn't have this sort of even intellectual understanding. Yeah, that's why when I got on the path,
Mhm.
no one ever told me, like, no one ever described to me this kind of a direct experience. Even back then when I
Mhm.
was completely in my mind, I had to like discover it myself. But if I was to hear myself talking this way, 5 years ago or 10 years
Mhm.
ago, perhaps the path would be faster because my mind would sort of be
Yeah.
primed. That's why some people, they even when I had the 5 ml breakthrough, my friend who did the same amount, he didn't have a non-dual breakthrough. Even though that non-dual breakthrough for me
Mm.
was also very short-lived, he didn't have the non-dual breakthrough. He had other kind of experiences that was valuable to
Right.
him, but he didn't know what I was talking
Right.
about when I said there was no subject object and how everything is just interconnected and empty. He didn't get the sense of that. But because I
Mhm.
was already reading a lot about non-duality and have been meditating for like I think 5 years already when I had that 5 memo experience. So the meditation, the reading about non-duality, watching Ruber Spiral, Adyashanti videos, reading The Power of Now, all
Mhm.
that, all that intellectual understanding eventually sort of seeped down deeper and deeper into the core of my being. And then when I had the psychedelic experience, I had a sort of this framework that I was building that I could have that glimpse. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have that glimpse. Before I started meditating, I took the LSD, but then I didn't have those insights either. But
Mm-mm.
after I went to my first retreat, and then I experimented with a little bit of psychedelics after my first retreat, I was like, holy shit, yeah, this is different than the experience I had before I had started meditating. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I think what's helpful too is even those meditations that you pointed out, right? Because I had been meditating since I was like 20, but maybe something was happening, but I'm not really sure. But in this process, listening to you, I kind of came across you through Angelo,
Oh,
Simply Always
Angela is
Awake, Dr.
wonderful.
Angelo. Yeah, I
Yeah.
went to one of his retreats, and he was kind of my first introduction to non-duality. And so I listen every day, and it's almost like even when I'm in pain, I'm like, just stop, just let the non-dual thing go. And it's like I still end up meditating, I still end up listening,
You're
but
right.
the it just is like sucks you in somehow.
Right.
But the 5-MeO, I feel like, is such a gift on this path because, as you just said, it gives you a reference point of what true nature or non-duality feels like.
I think 5-MeO is the closest thing to non-duality of all the psychedelics. But all
Mhm.
psychedelics, the only reason why that is just because 5-MeO DMT just takes away all your programs, all of your lenses perceptions, and all your conditionings at once. But then it comes back also
Mhm.
very quickly, right? But with like LSD, you have to go through layers and layers of dissolution, unbinding, or like mushroom. Like
Mhm.
even weed can be a great source of dissolution, but they're just slower, right? It's almost like running a marathon versus even meditation is pretty slow, right? So it's almost like
Yeah.
running a marathon versus just running a sprint. Right. So like when I describe a meditation retreat like a 10 days of just sitting in silence as like this marathon, and then 5 meal would be like a 20-yard sprint or even like a vertical jump. Yeah. But then they're
Right.
expressing the same, yeah, they're
Uh,
expressing the same thing. But some people's path, it depends, everybody's wired differently. I always say you should experience with as many different techniques as possible and see what works for you, right? Because people can get
Mhm.
stuck in vipassana just as easily as they can get stuck in taking LSD or 5-MeO or doing self-work. Any kind of practice, you can have it. There's a failure mode to every practice and every approach. But it's about the finding the interconnectivity between all the practices that really is going to be
Mhm.
beneficial.
And do you think that ultimately you don't even have a choice to go down this path or not? I mean, if there's no doer, who's the doer?
Yeah,
Awakeness is just waking itself up
yeah, that
using
becomes
all
more and more
these different
obvious.
tools.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just doing it to itself. Yeah, ultimately that becomes more and more obvious the deeper you go. Yeah, ultimately even the duality between like effort and effortlessness, or like intention
Mhm.
versus surrendering, or collapses. Like this, the ultimate question of for the seeker is, the paradox between seeking for what's already here, that everybody's already enlightened,
Mhm.
versus like the progressive path where there's a kind of a progression of this unbinding. Which one is true? Both are true, and neither. But then
Mhm.
this paradox doesn't resolve itself until it resolves itself, which is non-duality, because there's
Right.
still a duality there. So to me,
Right.
it's the same thing. Like going to if I talk to a client who is going through this process, and obviously he has like openings after opening, there seems to be a progression, or going higher, higher into the spaciousness, or I'm going deeper into the jhanas. There is a progression there, but the way I perceive that progression
Mhm.
is that it's both a progression and at the same time it's not a progression, because even stillness and movement,
Mhm.
like the duality between stillness and movement, collapses. So, and that's really hard to
Yes.
explain, because like I always tell people that the more paradoxes you can hold with the mind, the more quote unquote awake you are, the more boundless your consciousness is. Yeah, because it's obvious,
Yeah.
right? The broader your perception or your mind is, the more paradoxes you can hold, the more contradictions you can hold. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And it's interesting because in some ways it feels like you've entered into something that is so intimate, something that it's always been here. It's always here. It's the most intimate, closest thing. And you've been seeking this thing that's always there. And it's almost as if you've entered like the cosmic orgasm, where it's like so visceral and so close and settled. And I mean, hard to describe, really.
Yeah, that's why you can't even describe it. Like people just like angels just say this is the isness. Like
Yeah.
even using the word like awareness or consciousness to describe it doesn't do it justice anymore. Even like when I look out into the
Mm-mm.
world, I don't really see like consciousness or like awareness or even emptiness.
Yeah, so what do you see? Like, right now, what do you see?
I just see like whatever is presenting to me. Like right now, like if I see, okay, if I go on a date with a girl and I tell her this is emptiness, she's gonna think I'm crazy. And in a sense, she'll be right. So in that moment,
Right.
the concept of the cup is all that is. So the concept of the cup is the
Mhm.
absolute in the moment where it's more pragmatic to say this is a cup. There's many ways I can describe what I'm perceiving right now. I can say this is all just empty
Mhm.
vibrations, like vibrating into form or whatever.
Mhm.
Or I can say, this is just consciousness. Or I can say this is just a cup. Or
Right.
I can say this is the
Eh
suchness. So there's like infinite ways
Mhm.
you can describe it. But ultimately, none of those descriptions really do it justice. That's
What
why
about
it
love?
just can't love. Yeah, sometimes I use the word love, like unconditional love, because love
Mhm.
is just a result of having no separation, right? Even like romantic love, like I speak a lot about like romantic love. When like that was like one of the biggest catalysts for awakening is like romantic love. Romantic love or like sexual love is just a means to an
Mhm.
end on this path. It's just almost like a middleman to love with a capital L, unconditional love. But this unconditional love is not really an emotion. Like the Buddha said, the highest
Mm.
passion is dispassion, or compassion is dispassion. It's almost like the wind that can't really feel itself. It's only something solid in the
Mm.
center that can feel the emotion of love. So even love, it's like when you tell people this is love, they're gonna go into like their experiences of either like romantic love or even like cosmic love or like love for God, like this kind of like eternal bliss. But even that eventually gets transcended.
So what are relationships like for you now?
Better than ever before. Yeah, like we said earlier, the ultimate, the absolute is a relative. I don't see any distinction between romantic relationship and absolute infinity. I don't see any distinction between
Mhm.
the relationship between a mother and a son, like I can play that role when it arises. Just like I can say that, like the best way to describe this is a cup in the moment. If you're not into non-duality, I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
say this is emptiness or this is like consciousness, right? So just like the distinction between like the progressive path on the relative side and how there is no progression on the ultimate side gets collapsed, the relationship is just
Mm-hmm.
the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then like there's no sense of otherness. Yeah, there's no sense of otherness. But that doesn't mean other people don't exist. A lot of people times people get into like solipsism, like, okay, no one exists, the world doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just an idea as well. It's like the world exists, other people exist, but they exist as a construction, as your projection. But those projections arise when it's necessary. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's
Say
actually
more
very
about that.
simple.
Yeah. They arise when
What
it's necessary. Say
with
more
the right
about that. Why would they be
yeah.
necessary?
Like okay, for like I went through a phase where like okay, everything's a dream. You're not real. My mom's not real. I'm not really my mom's son. But that's not really the best way to interact with people. You still have to
Mm-hmm.
take into consideration other people's feelings, even though ultimately those other people's feeling is just your projection. But that doesn't mean that other people don't exist and they don't experience their pain and suffering. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So
So
like
have
the
you had a
relationship,
romantic relationship since your awakening?
yes and no. Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
dating a girl right now, but there's very little romance. Like the feeling of romance is
Mm-hmm.
not really there. But then this very deep sense of unconditional love, that is really not that different than everything else. But then the sort of the relationship aspect of it, the relative love can be nested perfectly within the ultimately unconditional love. But the emotion of like attachment and the
Mm-hmm.
stories and the narratives, expectation around romantic love that makes romantic love juicy is not really there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So the
Yeah.
only reason why you
So
experience this kind of romantic love is because of attachments and because of solidity, right? Because of
yes.
that solidity in the center. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But I haven't been in like
So
officially been in a relationship. Like there's no labels, but I am seeing this girl, but then there's not a lot of romance involved, which makes a love with the capital L in some sense even deeper.
is she awakened?
Yeah, she's in non-duality
Well,
too.
yes, and
Yeah,
she
but
is.
then we don't even talk. Yeah,
Would
we
it
don't
be
talk about this as well. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Like we rarely talk
a lot
about
of
this.
eye gazing?
A lot of eye gazing. Yeah, yeah,
Because does it get to a point where what is there really to say? Because the what's arising is just what's arising,
yeah,
and that's it. It's just the isness of what's arising and the
yeah.
beauty of it.
The beauty of it. That's another thing. The aesthetics of it. Like when I remember when I was experiments with LSD, and then I was really into like art and creativity and just beauty. Like I loved like classical music, right? Just listen to classical music. And I remember one time, this was like 10 years ago. I
Mhm.
dropped acid and I listened to classical music. I was like, holy fuck, this is the most beautiful thing that I've ever experienced. And it's so abstract and
Mhm.
so formless. But the only reason why that was so
Mhm.
beautiful was because that was just how music was without a hearer.
Right.
Yeah, so the sense
Whoa.
of
Yes.
aesthetics is one of the most overlooked aspect of the path. People talk about liberating suffering, but for me, because like I've been an artist my entire life, just this sense of awe and beauty and the sublime is just so incredible. Yeah, yeah,
I kind of wonder if some of that gets lost because people are in suffering so much, or
exactly.
the resistance that they're not even noticing, like the light on the leaf, the sun, like just the absolute exquisiteness of it because their mind is so filled with suffering. I mean, I know when I'm in my suffering, I don't notice beauty as much. And then when I'm
Yeah,
not, I'm just blown away by the beauty of everything.
yeah, yeah. The sense of
Yeah.
luminosity, like, oh, you asked me what I experienced, I can say, oh, I'm experiencing is luminosity. Like there's just this
Yeah.
awakeness, right? And then there's so much beauty in there. And the reason why we're not experiencing that beauty is because of, like you said, the filtering of your lenses of perception. Like Huxley wrote a book called The Doors of Perception. He's talking about how just
Mhm.
cleansing the doors of perception allows you to perceive reality as it is, or perceive the mind as it is. So this sense of a hearer, seer, doer is that contraction that duals the senses. Without that, contraction, without that resistance, without that selfing mechanism, Everything is just luminous, and
I
all your senses become more vibrant. And you get that on
yes.
psychedelics too. That's why
So
on
I
psychedelics, everything becomes more vibrant because your conditioning are getting dissolved. You're not gaining anything from psychedelics. You're just dissolving, right? So one way I describe the path is you're just dissolving from solidity to liquid to smoke to air, right? And then you take psychedelics. The reason why things become like they're breathing and they're sort of like morphing is because you're losing solidity, you're dissolving. And that's the difference between dream and
mhm,
reality too. Dream, the reason why psychedelic experiences, or even when you have a meditation experience, a mystical experience, it seems like dreamy, is because the perception becomes less solidified. But then when you become air, the interesting thing is it becomes solid again. It's almost like everything becomes a hologram, because like when you look at a holographic projection, it's
mhm,
completely like just made up of light. It's completely just empty. But then it's not like tripping. It's
yeah.
it can be like, but then you imagine if you put a virtual reality goggle on, and then you're just experiencing like
Mhm, mhm.
a normal neighborhood, not like outer space neighborhood, just like a normal neighborhood. But you have a virtual reality goggle on. That's kind of what it feels like, just like you have a virtual reality goggle on all the time.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. I said that to a friend recently. I'm like, imagine being like infinity and putting like VR goggles on. That's kind of what it does feel like, and at times you were just talking about the luminosity, where sometimes it's not happening now, but if I sit long enough, the space turns into just luminous emptiness, like
Yeah,
luminous something luminous.
yeah,
And I notice it's really interesting, this part of myself that will be like, "Is this it?" Like, it's so weird, like, this aspect, this mind that is, like, still seeking when it's in
right,
the
right.
midst of this luminous nature.
Yeah, that's very common too. And then you just let
Is
that be
it?
there. Yeah, the commentator
Yeah.
in the head, like the whole notion of a spiritual seeker is nothing but just this commentator in your head. Oh, I'm making progress. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. Right. But then you have to let that commentator run its course. Ultimately, you realize
Mhm.
that the commentator was never there, like the seeker was never there. But then to be able to realize that, you have to exhaust the seeker. So it's okay to let the
Mhm.
commentator be there, let the voices be there, but then just don't attach even more contractions or more voice on top of that voice, and just let it run its
Mhm.
course.
I remember Angelo said to me something like, "Parts of yourself that you love are gonna fall away, and parts of yourself that you don't necessarily love are gonna fall away. It's all gonna fall away." And it's interesting, I heard you say something about that in your process, like, even, like, your workouts and that part of yourself that was doing the visual art has I know you have a new form of visual art, but those aspects of yourself just kind of fell away, didn't they?
Yeah, completely fell away. Like I still work out, but like there's no desire in me to like want to look a certain way. Like I'm kind of just maintaining because that was a program I had in my quote unquote previous life, and it's a good program to have. It's just like getting up in the morning, brushing your teeth,
Mhm.
taking a shower. You don't think about these things. And when
Right.
I work out, like, or even when I create videos, or even doing this podcast, like I never think about what I'm gonna say. It's just part of the causes and conditionings that's happening in the universe. Yeah, but then
Mhm.
the sense of the self is not really to get rid of those programming, is it's to get rid
Mhm.
of the conditionings around the conditionings.
Mhm.
Because there's no, in a sense, there's
Mhm.
nothing but the causes and condition of the universe. So in a sense, you just disappearing into the webs of infinite causes and condition of the universe. This arises, that arises.
Mhm.
This ceases, that ceases. Right. So you don't interfere with that process,
Mhm.
and that's the end of suffering. So going back
And
to
no
my
control.
no control at all. Yeah. Yeah. Going back to what I was saying about the first and the second dart, the second dart is the conditioning around the conditioning. When there's only this first dart, you just get pure conditionings. When I say conditioning, it's just again, it's just the cause and the
Mhm.
effect of the universe. The sun is rising, the sky is what it is right now. It will rain due to the infinite causes and conditioning. When the rainbow appears, it's because of the infinite causes and conditioning that gives rise to the rainbow. And for that precise moment, the rainbow exists, but it's there and not there, right? You can't really pinpoint what the rainbow
Mhm.
is. It's kind of there, but then where is it? It's completely holographic. Like there's no rainbowness in the rainbow. There's like millions of cosmic conditions that have to arise for the rainbow to appear as a hologram. And same thing could be said about the self, about my perception of this like computer screen right here. It's just through that process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. So no desire anymore.
No desire, no craving. Like when you talk about
No
desire,
craving.
like desire to eat food and drink water, that's still there. It's just part of the biological. The body's gonna do what the body wants to do, but there's no craving around it.
Mhm.
Like I can still have sex, but my sex drive has gone down to like probably like 1% of what it used to be. Like in the moment, when like the right causes and condition arises, I can still have sex.
Right.
But then if I'm not having
Right.
sex, like I don't think about it. And what craving is really just this contraction of your attention. That's it. So you crave that chocolate cake because your attention is contracted in that the perception of chocolate cake. You're lost in thought because your direction of attention is contracted within this or that thought. So if you release the sort of this contraction of the direction of attention, there's gonna be no more craving. But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy chocolate cakes in the moment. In fact, the chocolate cake
Mm-hmm.
tastes even better because now you don't have the filters and the lens of perception that are in the way. So in a sense, sex feels better, but it feels like non-sex.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. It's just arising in the moment when the conditions are right
yeah.
versus this desire, this thought pattern
Right.
conditioning of a desire. Yeah, that
Or
makes
yeah,
sense.
or even the guilt around it. Like after you eat the chocolate cake, if you still have contraction, if you still have craving, then you're craving for something pleasant to continue to exist, or you craving for something unpleasant to not exist. Right. So when something exists, it
Mm.
just exists. When
Hmm.
something passes away, it passes away. There's no like direction of attention. There's no contraction around that. So there's no craving, but you can still
Right.
have quote unquote desire. But it doesn't really feel like desire when it's just like in the moment and it's just happening the way it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing how we like think we're controlling and the doer and doing everything and planning and we're not.
Yeah. There's ultimately
It's kind of
no such thing as planning. Yeah. Even
so
expectation is
one
an
of the
illusion.
It's wild. So one of the things that I felt was really helpful for me on this path, and you've hinted on it a little bit, is the sense fields, the sense gates. Because
Hmm.
even though I
Yes.
had those psychedelic experiences with five and other psychedelics to do like that kind of put me into the deep shadow work. And that was kind of my first understanding that I was like hugely conditioned. I'm conditioning. That's what I
Hmm.
am, basically,
Yeah.
the
What you
ego
are is just
self.
a
Um,
ball of conditionings. Yeah.
That's all I am. And
Hmm.
so then, after kind of having those openings with psychedelics, I had that experience where I don't know what you call it, where consciousness just was everything. It was not behind my eyes. I
Hmm.
was gone. Like I wasn't in the space. I'm not even sure what it's called. I don't know a lot of the words. And then in meditations, I would kind of like blink out. Not sure what that is, but so I was having those
Oh.
experiences. Um,
Wow. So you
yeah,
had
that happens
like
a
a
lot
blink
now.
out. Oh, like a cessation.
What is
Existence and
that?
coming back. That's a state of absorption that even consciousness disappears. That's kind of like they call the ninth jhana. Yeah, it's when your
Mm.
mind is so almost like you can describe it as your mind is so absorbed into itself, almost like a mirror that's reflecting on itself, and then it just collapses, and even consciousness disappears. Another way to describe it is
Yeah.
consciousness only arises through the object of consciousness. Even the experience of nothingness, that's still an
Oh,
object in consciousness. So consciousness is codependent arising with the
right.
object of consciousness. So when you remove all the object of consciousness, even consciousness disappear, and you get an insight into how everything is arising through this process of interconnectivity. And neither side of this or that, neither side of the subject nor object has any kind of inherent existence. So that's a very deep insight. And then, of course, when even your
That's
consciousness
interesting.
disappears, there's not going to be a self there. Yeah, so that's a really direct way to
No,
see
no
through the
self.
emptiness. No self, not even consciousness is there. So sometimes people
No,
can, yeah,
gone.
exactly. Yeah, everything is gone. Yeah, so sometimes people get into this like vast consciousness space. It's very easy to attach the rest of your identities and to cling on to that vast spaces and then be like, that's mine. Or like, oh, this God consciousness is me. There's still some clinging it. But when even that disappears and you just have that experience over and over, the experience of non-experience, the word nibbana actually means to blow out, like to put the light out. So it's a complete cessation of
Yeah.
even perception, experiences of consciousness. When you have that experience of negation over and over again, you kind of rewire your mind into deconditioning any kind of clinging, either to consciousness, to awareness, to any kind of state, or to the self.
I can see why that clinging to that feeling of I am consciousness. I can understand that clinging because as a human, it feels
It
really
feels amazing.
beautiful and right. And the blink out feels a little like, what is that?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
non-existence.
Yeah, the paradox is the more blink out experiences you can have, the more spacious you are. Because every time you have a blink out, another way to describe it is every time you have a blink out, you're dissolving, you're permanently deleting a part of your conditioning.
Mm,
Yeah.
mhm,
So every time you
mm.
come back from a blink out
Interesting. Okay.
experience, the more of your conditioning gets permanently deleted. And if more conditioning gets deleted, the more spacious the space is. So I always say once you realize something, that
Mm.
something disappears. It's like an eyeball that can't see itself. When consciousness or God is itself, then even the whole notion of God or
Right.
consciousness disappears. Yeah. So you get an even deeper realization when you're not clinging on to the realization.
Mhm.
When reality is itself, there's no room for even interpretation or even a knowing of that. It is just knowing as itself.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
Trippy.
I think one of the things yeah, it really is. And it's so interesting. It's so much trippier than psychedelics.
Yeah, that's the
Like
thing
at
I
some
realized
point you
too.
kind of like,
Yeah, it's almost so
I don't
it's like it's hard to describe. Yeah, it's you can't even say it's trippy or not trippy. It goes beyond even that. Yeah, it's like you tap it into like the very core of existence and non-existence. Like you
Mhm.
have a blink out experience, that's
So
non-existence. And when reality comes back from that, you realize that existence has always been non-existence. Emptiness has always been form.
always. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So one of the things that I felt super helpful on this path for me was the sense gates. And I think it was some pointings that maybe Angelo did, I'm not really sure. But it's almost as if when you're just focused on sound and body sensation in the visual field, that all, I don't know, it feels like it opened up a portal. Like
Oh yeah.
it's almost as, so could you describe that so someone could actually kind of try that, practice it? Um, when I say like the sense gates are like a portal, um, how would you direct somebody to try that?
Right. So you can have practices where you just try to see that in the scene, only the scene, right? In the herd, there's only the herd. In the sensing, there's only the sensing. There's no sensor. There's no hearer, there's no seer. So the portal that you were talking about is just the experience of having no sense of a seer. The sight, the sense gate of sight is just seeing itself. Sound is just hearing
Mhm.
itself. Thoughts are just thinking itself. So it's not really a portal, it's more like the dissolution of a center, which can seem like a portal, but then it's actually what's always been the case.
Mhm.
So it's a portal to what's always been the case. It's not like a trippy portal that you fall into. It can feel like that,
Right, to
but
what's here. Right,
it's
it's the
just what's
portal
here,
to what's
right?
actually here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you just start to see that there's just the senses. Even thought are just senses. So one way I describe it is you realize everything is just sensations. Like thoughts are just sensations, no different than physical sensations. Like there's no duality between
Mhm.
mind and body. Like the sensation of sound and sight, the sensation of even like awareness or time and space
Mhm.
is just
Mhm.
sensations. So you kind of equalize everything
So
into just being sensations. That's the sense gate, pure
so why
sense
do you
gate.
think
Yeah.
this happened? Like, why do you think, like, because I know at some stage, I think it's like up until 18 month, babies are non-dual, right? They have no idea of any
Right.
form of separation until 18 month, and there's, like, the whole theory of mind, and what is going on here? Like, why do we
Contract ourselves
go
into
into the illusion and go into a contraction of the self to then suffer, to then try to find a way out of suffering?
it's just like God is playing hide and seek. It's all a cosmic joke. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's
Yeah.
just social condition is a big part of it. Like the ego cannot exist without some kind of a social interaction. Like the ego is only created through like this interaction between you and other people. So the ego is a byproduct of social
Mm.
conditioning, pretty much, right? So and
Mhm.
then our society is constructed out of this sense of a collective ego. So in order to
Yeah.
survive in today's world, when you go through educations and you go through schoolings and you go to work, in order to survive, you kind of have to create an ego. But
Mhm.
then the catch is that with non-duality, you get to have your cake and eat it too. Like non-duality includes all dualities. Like the infinite is the
Right.
finite. So you can experience all duality from the non-dual state. You can still go to work. You can still, like I said earlier, you can still play the role of a boyfriend, girlfriend, even, or like son and daughter, or mother, or whatever,
Mhm.
through the non-dual perspective or non-perspective. Yeah. So a
Mhm.
big part of it is social conditionings. It's just
Mm.
because we're brought up in the environment where it's the norm to be a separate entity. So we have no choice but to adapt, because as organisms, we just have to adapt to survive. So ego is actually part of the survival adaptation process, but then you can
Yeah.
deconstruct that and still be in the game, be in the world, but not of the world. Yeah.
Right. So, could you imagine having a child and how you would raise them? Would you raise them with a non-dual perspective?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I
Yeah.
used to be really closed off of the idea of having like a family or having
Mhm.
child, or having children, but right now I'm pretty much open to anything. Yeah, so I can see myself just being alone for the rest of my life, not having kids, or I can see myself with a family. Either way, I'll be fine with it. And if I have kids, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my
Mm.
kids. Like
Mhm.
it's gonna arise spontaneously. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And being alone and not alone, are they the same for you?
the same for me. Yeah, absolutely the same. Yeah, I love being around
Mhm.
with people, but it feels no different than just being around by myself, because you're just full, you're just complete. Yeah. Yeah, but that actually gives you a more see, a lot of time we hang out with people because of this lack of completeness, right? So when you are already complete, it
Mhm.
makes the interaction with other people who, from your perspective, are also complete that much more vibrant and that much like sweeter. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, because most relationships are, as we were talking about, the conditioning or, trauma patterns playing out and needs being, a need being met versus unconditioned love.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of, I need this from you. You fill this part for me versus emptiness.
When you don't have that need to use other people to complete you, it just makes every
Mm.
moment of every interaction like so much more complete. And other people can feel it too.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why when you ask
Mhm.
me about the kids, it's like I don't know if I have to like teach my kids non-duality, just by letting them be
Mhm.
the way they are, or even just maybe throw a little hints at them. Like I wouldn't want to turn this
Mhm.
into a curriculum for my kids if I had
Right.
kids. But
Right.
even just maybe
And
just like letting them be the way they are, because I let myself, or my non-self, or whatever. I just let reality be the way it is. They're gonna feel that in the field, not my
mhm.
field, but the field.
Yes, it's the field, but you probably impact that field too with your body being so calm and resonant and your relative body. It affects the whole field, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
does. Yeah, I think there are studies that Jeffrey Martin was talking about a study where there's actually some scientific proof that like transmission is like a real phenomenon. Like I think that's kind of obvious. Like your brain emits energy, right? People
Mhm.
can have physical effect on others around you, right? But ultimately, it's just
Mhm.
the field transmitting to itself, really. But then
Mhm.
you can be more or less a catalyst of that. The
Right.
more
You're
quote unquote the condition you are, the more of a catalyst you are for the field to just express itself. Then the non-dual transmission is actually you're just letting things be the way they are, and then other people would
Mhm.
dissolve as a byproduct of being in a field where there's not a lot of contraction around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
So
not,
for
yeah.
your consciousness, CrossFit consciousness, is that what it's called?
Contemplative CrossFit. Yeah.
Contemplative CrossFit. I love
Yeah.
that. Um, especially having been on the CrossFit route. So you're supporting people on this path.
Yeah, I mean, that thing just kind of fell in my lap too. Like, I had no desire to like. I still don't consider myself as a teacher. When I'm coaching people, like I have a group of like 11 people, and then whenever
Mm.
I hop on a group call with them, even though they look up to me as a teacher, my direct experience is that I'm just part of the group. Like,
Mhm.
it's not even my
Mhm.
group. And after the shift, I just started getting emails from people. Oh, can you like coach me on? Because I used to coach fitness. That's why this whole thing became like
Mhm.
contemplative fitness, because contemplative CrossFit, because I used to coach fitness. And then after the shift, I just started coaching consciousness, and just kind of fell into my lap. Before the shift, like people ask me too, because I've been talking about meditation even before the shift. And people are like, oh, can you coach me how to meditate? Can you teach me how to meditate? But I never really felt
Mhm.
comfortable, or it wasn't, I didn't feel a drawn or a call to do that. But then after the shift, just spontaneous, like, okay, let's jump on a call. And that was my first client. The first person that asked me after my shift, like a couple of days after my shift, I just jumped in and had a call with them, and it just evolved into this, like, it's almost like a program now, like a course now. But I still don't feel like
Mm.
it's really me teaching. I don't feel like I'm any more awake or less awake than my group or you or anything else. Like, I don't really see enlightenment anywhere.
It's all awake.
Yeah, neither do I see unenlightenment. It's all awake. Yeah.
And enlightenment becomes kind of a story too. Like
Yeah, it's just another story, which, like, I think the Osho said the
it's
Buddha
another
chooses the
story.
enlightenment. Yeah, the Buddha chooses the enlightenment to be a ground that he can stand on in order to teach. So even like Adyashanti also said the same thing. I think he said realizing like I said, he wants people not to get stuck in enlightenment, like not to get too attached to being this
Mm-hmm.
enlightened being, which I went through that myself. It's like the ego
Mm-hmm.
is so sneaky. You can reattach itself and form, like, shapeshift itself into anything. Even if you have enlightenment experience, it's so easy for the ego to just attach to that, and it just start
I
perceiving
definitely have
yourself
felt
as
that.
being better. Yeah. Even like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people after
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic experiences, they would have like this phase where they feel like they're God or something like that, which is
I
completely
didn't
normal.
feel the
That's
God
beautiful.
thing, but I definitely felt I didn't feel the God thing, but I definitely felt like it's like this illusion of awake, like, oh, I'm awakened because I had awakening experiences and I saw all these things. And then I feel like compared to then and now, it's like I feel like I know nothing.
Even after the initial shift into non-duality, psychedelic can still be very useful actually to dissolve the rest of the conditioning. Now that you know not to hold on
Mhm.
to those experiences, they can in some sense be even more effective after initial stages of non-duality. But I would say that I remember when I was still going through the unfoldment, especially when I was going through a lot of energetic shifts, like Kundalini awakenings and stuff like that. I took like a quarter of a tab of LSD. That was like microdosing, and it
Mhm.
felt like I was on 5 ml DMT. But now, like so after I started having shifts, like psychedelics, or I was really afraid of psychedelics because of like how
Mhm.
everything becomes so intense and everything just becomes more intensive and everything just becomes that much, more. Yeah. But then within the last year, when this thing
Mhm.
really stabilized, I tried psychedelics and I didn't have an effect. Like I tried ayahuasca, I tried 2.5 tabs of LSD, I tried uh, salvia, and then I didn't trip. They're just a mild bodily high. There's no visual distortions, there's no trippy things. It's no different than what I'm experiencing right now, really.
Interesting.
And I took ayahuasca like a month ago, but like there wasn't like it was a. Eventually, I took the whole dose, but then I just didn't trip, except for a little bit of body high.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
proves your point.
yeah. It's like how psychedelics experiences are mainly just a byproduct and a side effect of the dissolution of conditioning solidarities and contractions.
It's all in the mind.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a byproduct of the dissolution of the dreamy mind. Yeah, it's all part of the dream, they say.
Yeah. So if anybody's starting this path, do you ever actually, I have this question for you because I've had people say to me, you know, family members or things like that. I'm not feeling this quite right now, but maybe 6 months ago, like, would you serve me medicine? Would you? And I'm like, oh gosh, do I want to even, what they don't know is good. Like,
Oh
do
yeah,
I
yeah.
even want to invite, like, oh, you have
I know
no
exactly.
idea.
Yeah,
Like,
I used to feel like that all the time, and that created a lot of suffering. Actually, it was like, oh, this is what I'm experiencing. Everyone should experience it. This is so great. But now it's just
right.
like nobody really
I,
needs to experience this. They're already in it in a sense. But if they are like really hardcore seekers and ask for my advice, I will tell them like what I think they should do. But it's
mhm.
still just my opinion. But like I wouldn't like the desire to just let everyone that even when I was into psychedelics, there was a desire to just let everyone experience psychedelics because it's so profound. Like I want my mom to try it. I wanted like all
Me
my
too.
friends to
I
try it.
had
It's
that
like
at first. I was like
yeah, but
evangelical. I was like, "You have to do this."
yeah, yeah. But that was
Now I'm kinda
lovely
like,
too.
"You don't need them."
You don't need them. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Nobody really needs anything, really. And
No.
like you
I
said,
said
none
that to
of.
my daughter recently, and she was like, "It's easy for you to say now." And I'm like, "I know, I know." And if someone had said to me because I even like, iboga was a really big medicine for me and,
Oh, I never tried
just
that.
the
Yeah.
conditioning that I had and the layers of conditioning that I am there's a lot of conditioning here. It was so interesting. I've been saying so much recently, you don't need psychedelics, and people will say, "Well, that's easy for you to say." Like, you've experienced it and you've done this work. But I'm even noticing, and I'm not sure about this, besides psychedelics, I do a lot of somatic inquiry with people where I just have them close their eyes and go in and use their own body as the deep subconscious material. And what I've noticed, and I don't know if this is true or not, but compared to even 2 years ago doing this work or a year ago, it seems like everything is on the surface. Like the shadow is up to be dealt with, because what would have taken medicine 2 years ago is not taking medicine. It's just close your eyes, go in, and the access seems to be there. Is that something like on the planet that's shifting? Is there many more awakenings happening? Like I'm just noticing like the shadow is so close. The mind can close their eyes, go right into the contraction in the body, go right into the emotion, go right into the core belief that came out of it, where maybe that would have taken a
Right.
boga before.
Right, exactly. I can agree with that. Yeah, that seems to be the process. Well, that's why at the end, the only practices that I was doing up to the very end was just do nothing meditation. It's just by abiding in the vast spaciousness, you'll see like the conditioning come up without even trying to like do vipassana, without dropping LSD. It would just come up. But then you're gonna have to have like the spaciousness that has to be there for that easy access to the subconscious, the rest of the condition to rise up.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if this has anything to do with like the collective awakening or anything like that. It does seem like a lot more people are getting into like non-duality, but I don't really know sort of the trajectory of that, or if there really is a collective awakening. Like I said, for
Mhm.
me, it's always both and neither. There is, but at the same time, there isn't.
Right, right,
Yeah, yeah.
right.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that whole process of like wanting everyone to try is a beautiful part of everybody's path. Like I think everybody would go through
Mhm.
that. They have a beautiful experience in meditation. Like who wouldn't want like the first time you had a non-dual experience, who you would want like everyone to experience this. But that's actually
Totally.
coming, yeah, that's actually at the end of the day, that's actually coming from your own projection. Like you still had some conditionings that you haven't worked through to want to desire other
Yeah.
people to be different than what they already are. Because nothing can be any different than what
Right.
they already are.
Yeah, and with that also was another piece there too of conditioning of like thinking that I'm more awake or more
Yeah,
evolved because I
exactly. It's the
have, and
same.
now I want this for you.
Yes, it's the same conditioning. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual ego, pretty much. But the spiritual ego is
Mhm.
really is something that's inevitable. It's like every time you have an opening,
Mm.
either through psychedelics or meditation, the ego is always going to shapeshift and just grasp onto that realization or that opening. But the key is not pushing it away. It's not to resist it.
Mhm.
It's just to let it be there, and then you will eventually be dissolved without additional contractions around that. So that's why I think it was a beautiful process that you probably help a bunch of people along the way
Mhm.
by doing that as well. So that's just part of your path. So like for me now, it's just like I'll maybe if they're interested, I'll point them to some kind of a direction where they can explore on their own.
Right.
Like there's no desire in me to like want to put
Yeah.
the psychedelic in their mouths. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was before I was like, "What if I
Yeah,
just
just
dose
like
you?" I would never do
yeah,
that, obviously.
yeah, I
But
had thoughts like that too.
this part of you is like, "Everybody needs to do 5-MeO-DMT.
Yeah.
Everyone."
Yeah, to me before I
Yeah,
was like, yeah,
yeah,
if
it's
you
so
have never
funny.
tried psychedelics, it's like never having sex. It's like it's
Right,
something you have to experience. Yeah, yeah,
in your
yeah,
lifetime.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still don't completely disagree with that actually. Even though there's no preference either way,
Mm-mm.
I still don't disagree with that statement actually. Like
Yeah, I don't
I
either.
do think
Uh-uh.
it's a very potent and profound experience for a lot of people.
I don't
Happen
think I'd be here. I don't think I'd
without
be
it.
where I am without them. No.
Yeah,
I don't
same.
think so. When would my conditioning have started to peel away? I was totally unaware of any
Right.
conditioning. I had idealized my
I didn't
entire
know.
life, childhood, everything. And so even when people are like, "What made you go to psychedelics?" It was more I had started to read. I was a big meditator, and then I started to read that a lot of teachers had used psychedelics and
Right.
earth medicines in the past. And I had a daughter who was depressed, and I wasn't really a fan of SSRIs. This was going way back when there wasn't all this evidence that psychedelics can help with depression and all that kind of stuff. I was like, I can't use her as a psychedelic experiment. And then a couple years later, I just had this magnetic pull. That's all I can describe it, because I was not someone who really, I'm not a drinker. I never experimented with drugs in high school or college. So, like you, I was kind of afraid. And then suddenly it was like I was on a plane and I was having a psychedelic experience that really kind of shifted my entire life. So it's hard now to
Popping the
say like you
cherry.
don't need them.
Yeah. It's just like
Yes.
you don't feel the need to like for other people, if it happens for them, it happens for them. Like if you give someone a psychedelics, it would just
Mhm.
be part of the flow too.
This path is a lot more difficult than I thought.
Oh
And now
yeah.
it feels like there's no getting off.
It's
Like there's no getting off.
it's like the easiest thing, but also the most difficult thing that you can ever do.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
so weird, just like you
Yeah.
said, because it's always here, it's always awake, and you're like, "It's so simple, it's so simple." It's like my fingers touching is it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's
Yeah,
just
that's it.
it, like,
Yeah.
it's just like it's so it, and then it's like, "Wait, I did all this seeking, and it's actually like that,
It's
just
like
that," you
chasing
know?
after your own tail. It's like a yeah,
Ye
it's like the or like like the carrot that's dingling in front of you, and then
Into the
you try to
stick.
yeah, it's exactly yeah. But
And
you
then
realize
when
there
you're
was
like,
never
"I'm
a
so
carrot, there's
tired,"
never a stick.
but you almost have to get so worn out. Like,
Yeah,
I think that was a day where I was like, "I'm so worn out. I am so sick of this. I am done seeking." And then suddenly I was like, "Oh my god. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? It's this simple. It's like right here. It's the settled thing right within me that's not even here." It was so bizarre.
that's a really good way to describe it. Yeah. It's something that's
It's so
always there, but it's
close.
not
It's
even.
like
It's so close that you can't. You are it. You know what I'm saying? It's like
you look past it.
yeah. It's like the eyeball that can't see itself. It sees everything else. That's going back to my analogy about existence and non-existence. That thing, in a sense, it doesn't exist, but it
Mhm.
manifests all of existence. But then you can't really find the source of it
Yeah.
because it is just this. There's nothing behind the curtain.
No.
Yeah.
No, and then everything's the source of it. It's like nothing's the
Everything is the
source of
source.
it, and
Nothing is
then
the source.
and
Everything
then
is the
it's the
source.
source of everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When everything is the source, nothing is the
Yeah.
source.
So then there's just like finally at some point, maybe at some point, there's a total where all the solidities are gone, and it's just there's no more of the contraction and the dark night to deal with
Yeah,
at
the
some
cycle.
point.
Yeah, at some point. Yeah, at some point, the contraction and
Yeah,
expansion would be so balanced that there's no more contraction and expansion.
that'll be nice. Maybe. Yeah. Do you have any regrets
Oh no, no,
looking at your
absolutely
life
not.
now and looking
No,
at
no,
the no,
no, no.
no.
The concept of regret doesn't exist in my mind anymore. Like the should haves, would
Yeah.
haves, could haves. It doesn't exist in my mind anymore. Yeah, that doesn't mean you
Mm.
can't have a day that's better or worse than another day. Just like the weather. But then, like, there's no suffering around. There's no identification to whether it rains or not.
Do you feel like you feel a wide range of emotions anymore, or are the
No,
emotions
most emotions are gone. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, except for this very tranquil feeling of unconditional happiness, which is not exactly like you say. It's like
Mhm.
the bliss thing. It's not really an emotion. Yeah, because happiness as an
Mhm.
emotion only co-dependent with sadness.
Mhm.
It's just a
Mhm.
very
Wow.
tranquil piece of, I guess, equanimity is a good way to put it.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you so much for coming here today and sharing your process. And how can people reach you if they want to reach out?
You can just type in Frank Yang on YouTube, or my Instagram handle is instagram.com/being underscore Frank underscore Yang. And my website is frankyang dot WTF. What the fuck?
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know just listening, people will get a lot out of it because just hearing this does something. I can't explain what, but just hearing the stories, hearing kind of the phrasing, hearing about non dual definitely sparks something within.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason why people hear it and they just can get something out of it is because they're already that. They're just hearing somebody describe. Some people tell me, "Are you kind of describing me?"
Right.
Yeah. So of course, like you're gonna get
That
some.
is great.
Yeah.
That is great. I love that.
Yeah.